Good morning. Many is the time I have been accused of coming on the air in the morning and taking a molehill and making it into a mountain. There may have been some truth in that. This morning in British Columbia, we are faced with a much greater problem. My suspicions that the authorities are carefully engaged in trying to make a mountain into a molehill. Now, I'm going to try and follow this through as a logical thought for all of us to digest. You know I'm talking about the judge's affair. And I must say off the top that as of this moment, with these two matters in front of the nation, and particularly in front of the people of British Columbia, the credibility of the administration of justice, or the credibility of all judges in the land, is under serious challenge, serious accusation. I go to my mythical man in the pub, and I say, what is the man in the pub or the housewife in the kitchen thinking about the state of affairs in relation to judges in British Columbia today? Now, to put the grounding to my thoughts, I'm going to call in my colleague, Mike McCardle, who yesterday tackled the Attorney General, Gardy Gardam, in his backyard on this particular topic.
There will be no investigation into the affairs of Chief Justice John Ferris. The judge, who is head of the BC Court of Appeals, resigned Friday after it was alleged that his name was found in a diary kept by a Vancouver prostitute. The discovery was reportedly made by police investigating a high-class brothel in an apartment on Jervis Street in the West End. The Federal Judicial Council said it was investigating him until he quit. Then it dropped its inquiry. Today, the provincial government also said there would be no probe into his affairs. Ferris, meanwhile, has stayed in seclusion in his Shaughnessy home. The door is opened by his wife, who says politely but emphatically that there will be no comment from the judge. Gardy Gardam elaborated that there will be no investigation into the affairs of Ferris or Provincial Judge Eric Bendrop, who has also been linked to a prostitute.
No, there's not a criminal investigation. I've made this statement before to the general public. To the best of my knowledge, there's absolutely no evidence of criminality in either situation. And I'm referring to either situation, either judge.
Is there any investigation into any influence of any judgments either judge may have made?
No, not to my knowledge.
With all the respect I can muster for the man who handles the administration of justice in British Columbia, I think he there took, and probably will continue to take, a very evasive position on this subject. I have always found it difficult to get Mr. Gardam in front of microphones or cameras to discuss these issues, which are of the prime, the highest public importance. And I'll never forget his opening comment on the Ferris resignation, that the Chief Justice, the top judge in British Columbia, had resigned in the highest and best traditions of the bench. Resigned in the highest and best traditions of the bench. Let me compare, although I don't want to get into the Bendrop affair too much this morning, because Gardam did succumb to pressure and supply a public investigation of a kind into the Bendrop affair. In the Bendrop affair, there is, and was presented, as I told you on my report yesterday morning, an admission of certain facts. All we have in the Ferris affair is an admission of certain rumors and allegations. Allegations would be a better word. So let's just follow it through. How did the Ferris story break? It broke because there had been a joint forces police operation, that's clue, into a matter other than a potential prostitution ring of some kind. That was sent directly to the Minister of Justice in Ottawa, Otto Lang. Otto Lang confirmed that it was the Chief Justice of the Court of Appeal of British Columbia. Thereafter, there was a pretty instant resignation of the Chief Justice. The matter was in the course of being referred to the Judicial Council of Canada, headed by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Canada, Boralaskin. Well, the moment that Mr. Ferris resigned, that apparently was that. Leave of absence till the end of the year, case dropped, book closed, all finished. Now, is that proper? Can that be acceptable to the people of British Columbia? Or are we entitled to raise an eyebrow somewhat querulously and say, now, All these people are judges and lawyers, and we don't challenge their basic integrity, their probity, or their administration of the justice. But in the Benrot case, the poor man is paraded properly in front of a public inquiry. In the Ferris case, no such thing has, or it would seem, is about to happen. And I want to question that. We are now in the situation in the city of Vancouver where many policemen, many lawyers too, are already muttering out of the corners of their mouths. The fact is that, and no one can deny this, and if Gardam wants to put his head in the sand and ignore it, he's wrong. Rumors are swirling around this town that would curl your hair. I'm not about to give credence or credibility to any rumors, but we know that certain facts are in the process of the law. I don't think the public is concerned, nor should it be concerned, about some two-bit body case, which may or may not two-bit body house case, which may or may not lead to some sleazy, salacious little bit of trial with names in a book. We went through that caper, and I was a reporter on it 20 years ago, and the whole thing was a disastrous comedy in many ways. This is different. This is not the late 50s or the early 60s. This is the late 70s. And the public in Canada has come to expect much more openness, much more frankness, much more full information. Because judges, lawyers alone are a breed apart. Lawyers alone have a special status. Even the Law Society is finally beginning to realize that they can't run their closed shop by themselves and wash their own dirty linen in private. We've seen a great cleaning up of the legal profession in British Columbia, for which they deserve credit, because they've been under the gun and under the jab of outside influences who no longer lie supine and let all these things happen and simmer away underneath the top of the stove. Judges are even more special. Judges have lifetime security. Judges are well paid. Judges are the people who must be holier than thou and make Caesar's wife look like a Vestal Virgin, because the whole basis of the liberty of the subject and the proper administration of the judges, of the law in this country, depends entirely on the trust and faith we put in the courts of appeal, the Supreme Courts, the county courts, and the provincial courts in British Columbia. And how Gardaí Gardam can brush off a demand for more information and a public investigation is beyond my comprehension. And I would suggest that it's about time that Bill Bennett, the Premier of this province, the man to whom Gardam is responsible, or the Cabinet, the Lieutenant Governor and Council, took a very cold look and told us, the public, what must be done. I'm not about to suggest that we have some sleazy public inquiry, particularly to humiliate a man who has reached a second highest position in British Columbia. I'm not about to suggest a wide-ranging crime commission. We know the crime that goes on in this town. We know all the drug caper, the killings and the murders and what goes on in this city. But we must be totally concerned about the probity and the credibility of the highest officials in our land, our lifetime appointed, tenure secure, pensioned for life judges. And it's up to Mr. Bennett and Mr. Gardam to tell us in what particular way they're going to put our minds at ease that all is well in the highest courts and all the other courts in the land.
Jack, you see the V4s there? Make sure you don't run ahead too far.
I think I said that quite safely. Wazowski report. Having said my piece on that particularly highly serious and sober subject, I now want to be more positive. I want to give Pete Brzezowski, the special investigator into the Vancouver General Hospital, a pat on the back for a good job well done, even although Bob McClelland, the Minister of Health, did reject one particular solution which he suggested for the continuation of President Larry Truitt of the Vancouver General Hospital. But at long last, we had a man who moved in who wasn't a civil servant, who could look at things cleanly and clinically and say, here's what's wrong with the hospital and here's what should be done. The nurses, for instance, haven't yet spoken up, but they should be very pleased indeed. The nurses, however, do not come off scot-free. And what I want to do now is just very shortly go through my very simplified highlights of the Brzezowski report. So we start off with all the faults. The nurses highly suspicious of President Truitt. You know, Truitt, a good man, gets full remarks, but there was too much on his plate, and the problems were there before he got to Vancouver General Hospital at all. And then something that had to be said. The General Hospital, far too big, with this general mistrust by everyone of the administration and their fancy titles. The nurses, there's no doubt about it, come in for some criticism. For instance, we didn't know until this report that in August of 1978, 320 beds were closed because of nursing shortages, and 200 beds are still closed this very day. Friction and mistrust all over the place in spades. We all knew that, of course, but it's nice to see it in black and white. And this is a point that came up many times. The BCIT nurses are good girls, well-trained in all the technical stuff, but not well-trained in the practical stuff. And as Brzezowski says, some solution must be found for that. We all know the problems with part-time nurses. They will only work the chosen shifts, the best shifts, to suit their husband's working hours or to suit their holiday time in the summer. You know, one's got to make the big money all year round and just as one suits one. But they dodged the nights and weekend shifts. Very importantly, Brzezowski draws attention to the fact that it's not just another hospital of VGH. It can't refuse the patients, and the financing undoubtedly has not reflected the special needs of VGH. What's next? The old story, it's been going on for years, too many chronic cases in acute care beds, which now cost hundreds of dollars a day. This is another one, goes back a long way, and McGeer certainly hasn't helped this one. The resentment between the town and the gown. The downtown doctors who feel they're getting squeezed out, the UBC faculty who run the place, and now they're bringing in more doctors from the east to the downgrading or the lack of opportunity for local doctors. And they're very upset about it, and you can't hardly blame them. The Employee Relations Department really gets kicked in the teeth by Brzezowski in delicate language, but you can see what he's trying to do. Shake that department up. That's certainly what he's doing. Now, have I got a V4 on what's going to be done? Have I got another V4? I'd like to see the other V4 on some of the things that are being done. McClelland takes over as public administrator, and Marie Taylor is an excellent choice as the interim president of the hospital. Next one. Truitt, with his knowledge, and he's the guy who knows what's going on in the external matters of the hospital, is going to be there for some little time as a consultant. And I understand things are very copacetic between him and the government, and that's the way it should be. The Employee Relations Department is going to be shaken up for sure. Next one. Is that the lot? 60 full-time nurses to be hired immediately. Now that's where McClelland should take the can. He should carry the can on that one. There never has been enough money for enough nurses in the General Hospital. The Health Centre for Children was sadly neglected for many years until the patients, the parents of the sick children themselves began to sleep beside their children's beds, and they finally kicked up such a stink that Premier Bennett had to come through with $200,000 for emergency staffing. So when we look at these 60 full-time nurses, let's not forget the Health Centre for Children, which has got a few years to go yet before it gets out of that dreadful accommodation and gets into the new children's hospital. I don't think there's much else I want to say about what Peter Brzezowski said. There, of course, is going to be a complete reshuffle of the hospital corporate structure, a new act, in other words. Obviously, the hospital society was getting into such a mess with the pro-abortion and the anti-abortion forces that they were going to pack general meetings until the whole thing became a farce and a laughingstock. And McClellan, he may drop dead when he hears this praise from me, deserves credit for, and I hope in the first session of the legislature he brings in the necessary legislation to clean up the corporate structure of the General Hospital. Now, while we're on the subject of yesterday's program, which I enjoyed thoroughly with Brian and Bill Peters from Ottawa, we're going to have a little follow-up on that gun amnesty. It would seem that the word hasn't got around to all the police departments yet.
Jack, you remember yesterday we explained the do's and don'ts of the federal government's gun control program. And one of the weapons we dealt with was the M1 rifle, an automatic weapon. We said it was restricted and that there were about 30,000 of them in circulation, yet only 10% of the weapons have been registered. We said that under the program, the M1, as a restricted automatic weapon, must be registered and can only be used for two purposes: for target practice at a gun club at which the owner is a member, or the gun must remain in the home as a collector's item. Now, there's been a lot of confusion centering around the program, so we thought we'd have a little bit of fun trying to interpret the rules. We phoned 13 police stations claiming to own an M1 automatic rifle. And here's what we were told. Vancouver, Burnaby, Langley, Maple Ridge, and Chilliwack all had the right answer. The weapon is restricted and therefore must be registered. Now, here's where the fun actually begins. Surrey Detachment couldn't give us an answer because the gun control officer was on days off, and we were told to call back. Both Matsqui and Richmond weren't sure whether or not the M1 was prohibited or restricted. And West Vancouver and Delta told us the gun must be seized, it was definitely prohibited, and therefore the gun must be destroyed. White Rock and Coquitlam detachments took first prize in this little phone inquiry. Coquitlam asked us, "What type of rifle is that? I think it should be registered, but you definitely can use it for hunting." And White Rock told us, "Yes, it's a fully automatic weapon, but it doesn't have to be registered if you're going to use it for hunting." Well, anybody who knows the M1 would shudder at the prospect of hunting with a fully automatic weapon. It's the next best thing to a machine gun. And the confusion about the M1 proves one thing: the various police forces have not taken the steps to properly inform enough of their people about the program. And if the gun control program is going to work, it's up to the provincial gun control officer to see that the various forces do so.
Thank you, Brian. That wasn't an unfair cut at the situation. There is considerable confusion. The blame really lies, as well as with the provincial people, with the federal people. I think the gun amnesty program is a good thing. Well, I've got a friend of mine dropping in later on this morning on videotape. But in the meantime, I think we'll go to the phones. I'm not encouraging any calls of rumor or speculation. That I will not take. One, it's legally impossible, and two, it's bad taste. Secondly, I don't particularly want to discuss the Benrot case at the moment because there is a quasi-judicial hearing on right now. As a matter of fact, Brian Coxford is there, so that you'll get a full report on that tomorrow morning. But some of you may find that my views on the standards of conduct of judges belong to the 17th century. It may well be that I've been brainwashed, or at least the 19th century. I'm not sure. However, we'll go for a free-for-all on the phones for a little while to see how it works. I haven't done this yet on BCTV and our extra 90 minutes of prime time. But do remember, turn your television down. Keep your comments crisp and short. There is no guest here this morning. It's just Webster. Short questions, short answers. Eh? Which telephone do I come up on? Which telephone? Well, here we go on our first free-for-all. We've been on the air how long now? About 6 weeks? Seems like 6 years. Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning, Jack.
Morning.
I happened to read an ad in the paper last week, and
I'm glad you did. What was the ad?
the ad was from Tilsley's auction.
And what's the point?
And in the auction, it listed quite a few guns that were going to be auctioned off. And so I phoned the gun control officer, and the woman answered and said that these guns will not be picked up there. They have to be picked up at the police station. Now, I'm wondering, how are these guns displayed at an auction, and how do the guns get from the auction room down to the police station for a person to pick it up after
Well,
he's
as a
bought it?
matter of fact, there is a problem about that. In fact, if you have any kind of registered weapon or prohibited weapon, you must get a permit to move it even to the auction room.
I see.
That is something which the gun control officer in Vancouver City Police Department could tell you, but you can't just, if you've got a Schmeisser machine pistol, which I hope you don't have,
No.
you can't pick it up and take it down in your briefcase, except to take it to the police for the purpose of the amnesty to turn it in.
Well, now,
Otherwise,
these
if you're going to
how
an
are these
auction,
guns
you must get a
displayed?
police permit. Pardon?
Pardon?
Otherwise, if you're going to an auction, you must get a police permit. Got to leave you there. Go ahead, please.
Hello, how are you this morning?
Fine.
Just a couple of small comments on sort of the VGH and its allied situation.
Right.
I spent a very short period of time in there a little over a month ago. And one thing that did bother me was that there were a number of immigrant nurses on the floor. Now,
Why
the
should that
quality
bother you?
of care was there, but what concerned me and the other people that were on the ward with me was that after they treated someone, 2 or 3 of them would get together right in the middle of the ward and speak in their first language.
Oh, I don't think that's a legitimate complaint at all.
Well,
If
I
I
do
were
because
working-
they would look at a guy and start chuckling, and you weren't just too sure what was going on.
Oh, no.
Talked to other people, and they were concerned about it. I've got a second concern. When you talk about the fight between your downtown and the faculty,
Right.
is that if maybe someday you would look at the respiratory clinic, which is on the north side of 10th Avenue, right across from Heather Pavilion, plus some other, and I think it's a rebuilt old Army building. That's how old it is.
Why should I look at it? I know the old chest clinic.
Yeah. Now, you know, the inside of it is so dilapidated, and here,
The whole thing, I think that goes in the reconstruction.
if and when,
Oh, 1980 it'll be got. What's it?
The
Children's
Kent-
Hospital. 1984?
had the funds allotted
1983.
a few years ago to rebuild the cancer clinic, and Bill Bennett washed them out.
Don't think so, but I'll check it out. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Mr. Webster.
Morning.
I may get blown off the blackboard by you, sir, but don't public officials have any kind of a private life anymore?
Well, that's a very good question, and there's no reason to be thrown off the blackboard. Public officials, of course, have a private life. But public officials, as judges, must lead. As a matter of fact, judges, by necessity, choose their friends carefully, choose their social life carefully, must avoid drinking excessively, or should avoid drinking excessively. And I've got friends who have become judges one way or another, and they realize they've got to restrict their circle of acquaintanceship because of the fact that they're in a special status. They have a private life, and if it's a normal private life, they're fully entitled to their private life. If, however, their private life becomes a public life, game over, as in the Farris case.
Okay.
Special breed of people apart with special responsibilities.
Okay.
They're not like you and me.
Alrighty.
Or is it you and I? You and me.
Okay.
Okay. Sound like a Presbyterian minister, but still, that's the fact of life in our climate, in our country to this day, so far, and thank goodness it is. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Mr. Webster.
Morning.
I wonder if you could tell me what benefit the formation of the Urban Transit Authority is to me, taxpayer, as far as I can...
I'll tell you what benefits to you as a taxpayer. It's going to increase your taxes.
Well, this is just what my point is.
Am I in the 24 blackout in the civic election? I think I am. Can't talk about it. Go ahead, please.
Oh, who, me now?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, Jack, what I was going to mention was Oh, was the...
Mm-hmm.
It's not me.
It is you.
Oh, you're kind of...
No, it's you.
Yeah, okay.
It's you.
Yes, I was
I'm
just...
perfectly all right this morning. You're a wee bit slow-witted.
Of the Vancouver General Hospital.
Mhm.
I have been in about 6 times. I have heart trouble, and they rush me in there. And what I would think they should investigate is the aides around the floor. The girls that clean the floors and change your water and that, they come into your ward and they sit down and they read your magazine, and sometimes they spend half an hour in your room instead of getting on with their work.
Well, hopefully now that we're going to have a vice president in charge of nursing,
fine.
and much of the friction and mistrust will go. I've received myriad complaints about that. That's what should happen under the new administration. Should clean up all these messes. Go ahead, please.
Are the judges appointed, or have they been lawyers before they become...
All judges have been lawyers nowadays in British Columbia. They are appointed to the Supreme Court and the Court of Appeal on a federal recommendation, although the Attorney General has to give his formal nod to the appointment.
Thank you.
Yeah, federal. Magistrates, which the provincial judges should still be called, are appointed by the provincial cabinet. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Mr. Webster, I understand your point concerning how judges must monitor their activities and their social life and so on. But one thing I'm a little bit in confusion of is that judges are the upholders of justice. They're not the upholders of the public morals. And virtually everyone in the society, in a public or a private position, from the Prime Minister on down, must have some sort of ghosts in their closet. I was wondering, where do you actually draw the line between a reference that may or may not have been to a high-placed judge in a prostitute's diary and a person's right to privacy? There seems to be an obscuring of...
Okay, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll deal with that, and I'm going to tell you a story, a fascinating story, which I covered as a reporter some considerable years ago in Vancouver, which is right on the point. So if you'll hang up and listen, I'll tell you it. Okay?
Thank you.
Right. Take it away while I think about it. A caller just asked me at what point the private life of a judge can cross over into his public life and make him no longer a proper person to sit. I think the Farris case is a classic example of what had to be done. And that is that when the Minister of Justice confirmed that Mr. Farris was under investigation and his case being referred, that a preliminary investigation, a report had been made to him from Clue in Vancouver, direct to him as I understand it, not to Gardam, because Joint Forces operation is part RCMP, of course. Lang had no option but to refer that to the Judicial Council of Canada. Now, there has been mention in the Farris case of other aspects. I want to tell you a true story which took place in Vancouver, and I can't remember the year. But I wasn't doing talk radio, so therefore it was more than 17 years ago, probably between 18 and 20 years ago. And a well-known madame, madame, you know what I mean by madame, like Kitty in Gunsmoke, somebody who runs a bordello of some kind. A well-known madame was charged with conspiracy to live off the avails of prostitution. It was a kind of early Filippone one. And I think there were 6 girls in what we crudely but properly called the stable. And the woman first pleaded not guilty, as I recall. And for months, the city was kept on tenterhook because there were 9 books of notes kept by this madame which were about to be entered in evidence. And of course, many people were afraid that these particular books were going to have their names in them. So, an interesting background is that the woman had previously been questioned by the Income Tax Department on her source of income. And she had been instructed by the Income Tax Department that if she didn't keep proper records, they might give her a net worth assessment, and they would not allow her deductions. 2 of the deductions she claimed at the time, mind you, were for graft and corruption of police and city hall officials. And I went to the Exchequer Court. She wouldn't name the police or the city hall officials to whom she alleged she had paid graft, and she was refused the deductions. Finally, after many months of meandering, the madame and the girls pleaded guilty. And they were sentenced. She got 8 months and the girls got 6 months each. So, bright, brash young reporter, I went to my old friend W. Edwards, JP, now retired, and said, Mr. Edwards, you have 9 books of evidence which have been entered. They are now public documents. I want to see them. I want to see whose names are in the book. And Edwards said to me, no, you can't see them. I said, well, let's go and see the magistrate. I won't name the magistrate, a fine magistrate, now retired. And I said, sir, can I see the books? He said, Mr. Webster, he said, I can prevent you from seeing the books until such time as the time for appeal is over. These books are, however, public documents. But he said, I would ask you to consider one thing. 2 things, he said, I want you to consider. 1, your name could be in the book. I said, no, my name couldn't be in the book. Oh, he said, yes, your name could be in the book. He said, that madame could have put in all kinds of names of people to give herself protection, to prevent other names being published. And what defense have you got, Webster, said the magistrate to me, if your name is in the book? So I scratched my head and thought, well, that is a tricky one. And the other request which the magistrate made to me, it was not an order, as I recall it, was, the other request was, please, Mr. Webster, don't go on the air and say that these books are here as public knowledge, because he said every suspicious wife in Vancouver will be queuing up at the police station to find out if her name is in the book as a customer of this particularly notorious bawdy house. Things were tighter and closer then, so I looked at the books and didn't do anything about them. Rightly or wrongly, I didn't do anything about them. But that kind of situation caused many problems and much rumor and speculation in this city for many years. And I don't know how you handle it. In fact, I don't even have a recommendation how to handle the current problem. As I said, we have a premier in this province who is a moral, upstanding man, if ever there was one. And we have an attorney general similarly so. And what I laid on their plate this morning was what I think is their responsibility to tell us how they are going to reassure us of the credibility of the judges and where we go from here. And I'm not maligning or smearing or making a target of any other judges in any way, shape, or form. I merely say that in the Benrot case, we have an admission of fact to a point. The matter has been dealt with publicly. In the Farris case, we have an admission of allegation, and quite obviously, the Gardams of the world. And don't forget, Otto Lang has a responsibility for this too, come to think of it. Perhaps I should also direct my attention to Mr. Lang and his responsibilities, or even to the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Canada. And between them, Mr. Lang, Chief Justice Bora Laskin, and the Prime Minister of this province, we should be advised what steps will be taken to re-establish in toto the dignity and credibility of the people on whom our liberty depends. You're first up. Are you on the topic? Button at the end of this. I may take promo at the end of the next one. You've got lots of time for Burton, haven't you?
Yeah, but if you want it for balance, do you go get any of the 2 segments? No?
If the phones are going good on this. Where's that one from? Port Hardy on gun control. Go ahead.
Yes, Jack.
I told you to speak up.
I am Mr. Jones from Port Hardy.
Yeah.
And I would like to say that the gun control should start in the sales offices
Well, it's going to start as of January. You'll have to have a firearms acquisition certificate even to buy a rifle, sir. And we explained all the rest clearly yesterday. Paul River, go ahead, please.
Oh, Jack.
Yes.
As a collector, gun collector, I have two 9mm German Lugers and a 9mm Browning, which are not registered and have never been. I got them from friends. Now, I realize that this amnesty would protect me, but could the police find out from me where I got them from and possible charges thereafter?
If you turn them in under the amnesty, no. They will ask no questions if you turn them in under the amnesty, unless the gun checks out as one which killed somebody, in which case they'll come back and do a heavy number on you.
Oh, good. Then my friends are protected.
Quite sure that if you take it in as an amnesty, they'll take your name and address, register it as having been received from you, and that'll be the end of it, and that's certainly what you should do.
Thank you very much, Jack.
My pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Go ahead, please.
Jack.
Yes.
Can you tell me, or can you find out, why one arm of this provincial government we've got is spending, I believe it's $2,500,000 to tell British Columbians about the evils of drink, and on the other hand, introducing 40-ounce bottles into the liquor store to the exclusion
As a matter of fact, I very nearly hit Mayor over the head when he was on the program a couple of weeks ago with one of his own 40-ounce bottles. I think it's the worst hypocrisy you could possibly have.
We should check that out.
I've checked it out. It's only the local distillers can use the 40-ounce bottles. This will be a bonanza for Hiram Walker, I think it is, Potter's Distilleries, and one other.
Don't you think it's an awful contradiction to spend $2.5 million telling people not to drink so much and then introducing 40-ounce bottles into the liquor store?
I think it's disgusting, and it's a bad mistake by Rafe Mayer. Yeah. Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Mr. Webster.
Morning.
I just want to talk about, I'm a little nervous, about the VGH nursing.
Mm-hmm.
My husband was in the hospital about a month ago, and I must say that the nurses, there's very few nurses wear white uniforms nowadays. And this, to me, confuses an awful lot. Of course, my husband isn't an old man by any means, but there were some older people in the...
Look, ma'am, let me tell you, I was up at that fancy big mausoleum of a chronic care unit at UBC. The corridors are wider than this studio. And the nurses were wearing jeans and, what do you call them, sweaters, jumpers?
Sweaters.
Jeans, and I think it's awful.
Yes.
I think old people especially are entitled to the presence of one thing they can always spot, a clean, smart nurse in a white uniform, whether it's an old folks home or whatever it's in. And I think, don't tell me at the general they're not wearing uniforms.
Oh, they're wearing uniforms, but they're wearing...
What?
They're wearing uniforms, but they're either pink or blue.
It depends whether they're boys or girls.
Dirty.
No. I'm sure these small things will be straightened up. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Mr. Webster.
Yes, sir.
I was just wondering why the government controls registered guns and yet didn't have any plan to control unregistered guns. That's shown by the poor turnout in the BC area. Now, why didn't they just have them required to present a gun certificate, registration certificate, to the shop owner when they wanted to purchase ammunition? I mean, if you can't produce a gun certificate, then you can't purchase ammunition. And so if your gun isn't registered, it's much harder for a criminal to purchase ammunition across the counter.
No, criminals are going to get ammunition anyway.
Oh, yes, sir. But
the fact remains, I put that yesterday to Bill Peters from Ottawa and said, why don't you control ammunition? And he said that they're not going to do it, and I think it's a mistake. Ping. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I have a question and a comment.
Yes, ma'am.
A comment on VGH. My son was just in there, and I found it marvelous.
Good.
Whether or not the nurses were black, white, yellow, or tan.
Green.
They were all fantastic.
And in pink or blue booties.
I don't care.
Neither do I, as long as they're clean and smart.
That's right, and as long as they treat the patients with love or care.
And they do.
And this is the main point. The question I had, though, is how did the dev security man know about the diary? And why was he allowed to put it to the public before the authorities? Why were these judges pilloried before it went into court? Because they were judged without having any access to...
You're not quite right on that, ma'am. Not quite right on that one.
Oh.
The accusation made publicly by that fellow at the Devonshire Hotel was not something that one could sit back and say, jolly good show, he did it. The fact remains that once it was made public, a public inquiry, and a lot of nagging from this corner, followed, as there must be, especially in the city of Vancouver. Don't forget, the way you have prostitution in Vancouver, you have drugs in spades. That's why prostitution becomes more of a serious offense than the glamorized business of somebody phoning up a call girl.
Yeah.
I mean, it's prostitution allied to drugs, which put the heavy emphasis on the particular behavior of judges. And I have no apologies, at least I think the public inquiry into Benrod is right.
I agree the public inquiry is right. I just don't like the
Well,
idea.
I would suggest to you, ma'am, that had it not been for that particular expose, there would not have been a public inquiry into Benrod. The plans of the Judicial Council were undoubtedly, in my view, to hold the Benrod inquiry informally, in camera, without even perhaps a full meeting of the Judicial Council. On the other hand, in the Farris case, however, we have a judge, the chief judge of the Court of Appeal, who resigned the moment he was challenged.
Yeah.
And obviously the plan at the moment is to bury that deep and bury it dead.
I would like it open to find out whether or not he was guilty because...
No, that's correct, to give the man a chance to respond. But obviously, on resigning...
It takes me, the provincial court judge I don't really care about, but it was Judge Farrell, and the fact that he seemed to have been... This man came up with an allegation that he was named in a diary.
No, that was a different thing. I'm not aware of that allegation made by that person at that time.
He made it on the TV news one night.
But the fact remains that the Benrod one was followed with an inquiry, and...
No, it was before any of it came out.
I'm well aware of what you're talking about. I don't necessarily accept everything that man said, ma'am. That's what I'm trying to tell you. He came to me once, some time ago, on another story, and I virtually threw him out my office.
Well, that's what I'd do. It was just, I just want to know why he got to the diary before anybody else.
I would like to know too, but I don't know, and I'm not going to speculate if he did, or if he didn't, or if he should, or if he shouldn't. Take a break.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Bye. Call the promos. Can I have some coffee, please?
Sure.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, Jack, good morning.
Morning.
I found your story about that situation a few years back about the madam with all the names in the book quite interesting. I won't ask you whether you did find your own name in the book.
I did not find my own name. My name was not in the book.
Okay.
Not even for her protection.
Okay. However, just without too much personal pros or cons as far as prostitution is concerned in Vancouver, I found that the Benrod case, the Judge Benrod case, was quite a disgusting public display of a man's personal life and problems.
No, I wouldn't say disgusting. It was a sorry spectacle.
It was a terrible story.
Yeah, but I don't. That's in front of a quasi-judicial hearing. I've taken the basic facts on that and left it at that. Let's wait to see what happens.
Okay. Now, can I get to another point? At the present time, according to the Canadian Canada Criminal Code, etc., is it illegal for a person to have personal involvement with a prostitute?
No, it is not. Let me make that quite clear. We did a special on prostitution earlier on. There is no offense committed between a willing buyer and a willing seller. The only offenses committed are when the soliciting in public becomes pressing and persistent, which is a silly decision by the Supreme Court of Canada, leading to all the troubles here. When premises are used for a body house, or when someone can be accused of conspiring to live off the avails, to wit, as a pimp.
Exactly. Okay. Now, was there ever any question of that in the Benrod case at all?
No comment on that whatsoever. An admission of fact was made by Cecil Bronson that he had a conversation with a girl, got into a cab with her for the purpose of going somewhere for sexual intercourse, and that's all that was said on the admission of fact. Go ahead, please.
May I speak to you, Jack?
Yes, sir.
Hello?
Yes.
Jack, I'm concerned about something yesterday on your program, and I must admit that I didn't catch all the program. I just tuned in. I don't know whether it's your statement or Peyton's or whose it was.
It wasn't my statement. It wasn't Peden's statement. He wasn't even mentioned.
The fact that it was on Georgia Street and so on, and that Bendroth got into a taxi cab with this known prostitute for the purpose of sexual relations. Now, who made that statement? Can you tell me?
That statement was made in court in the quasi-judicial hearing by Mr. Bronson, the counsel for the BC Judicial Council. In fact, if I've got my shorthand notes there from my pad of yesterday, which is over on the other desk, there were 5 admissions, one of which was that on a certain day in October, not that pad, another pad, certain day in October, an admission of fact was made that yes, he spoke to 2 women known to him as prostitutes, gave their names. One was Margaret Getz, alias Tammy Charlene Geary, and the other one was a girl called, I can't remember, Dawn Thompson. And he got into a taxi cab with a Getz woman for the purpose of going somewhere for sexual intercourse. That was an admission of fact filed by the counsel to the commission.
Oh, he did admit to that?
Yes.
I see. Because otherwise it would only be conjecture.
No, it was an admission of fact. Also, there was an admission of fact that Darrell Jones, the administrative judge, had remonstrated with him over his habits of drinking.
Right, right. Thanks, Jack.
Thank you. That's for the record. I don't mind saying that at all. Go ahead, please.
Mr. Webster.
Yes, ma'am.
The thing I have against, say, all magistrates or judges, if they're consorting with prostitutes, is that if a case comes up, they could be blackmailed into, letting them free. That's
Ma'am,
what I have against it. We were talking about it last night.
One has not suggested that in any way, but any common sense person must bear that in mind.
And another thing, this is going...
Go on.
This is going back quite a long time, but this is sort of funny in a way. There was an Italian family down in...
No, I don't want to get into that story, ma'am, because I don't know the story you're going to tell me, and I don't like to take these things blind when you start to be specific. Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning, Jack.
Morning.
I know of another judge that should be removed.
No, I will not have that. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Calls like that give me near heart failure. That call, the man was not attempting to be difficult. He didn't swear. He didn't do anything of the kind. But he demonstrated, and he might have been specific, about further suspicions of his involving other people. But that call, which I killed, because I'm not about to smear everybody in sight, is another classic example of why the public must be told all the truth. Kamloops.
Yes, Jack. The judge, they are human being like anybody else.
I'm afraid so.
Yes, I wait 35 minutes to tell you that, too.
I'm glad you told me that.
Yes, because
Judges
what's
are
the matter with the judge? They are human being. You believe on human being, eh?
They're all human beings, but judges are under special strictures.
Well, special. The priest is special, too, eh?
The who?
The priest.
The priest is very special, but the priest can't send you to jail. The priest... somebody might blackmail a priest, but I hate to think of the consequences if a judge were blackmailed. Oh, no, away with you. They're human beings, but they're special human beings with special responsibilities. This one's from Cash Creek.
Has BCTV ever considered putting your program as an evening program, as I'm sure that you're missing a great audience? I would think your program is one of the best that BCTV has, but the majority of the people are working when your program is on the air.
Well, I would think it is one of the best programs they have too, but we have gone a deliberate and special way with this program. We hope to create 90 minutes of prime time in the morning. After all, no matter how good Webster might be on the odd occasions, do you really think that Webster, apart from looking like Archie Bunker, could beat Archie Bunker's ratings? Do you think that Webster could compete with a Gong Show? Do you think that Webster could beat, for instance, Lavoine and Shirley, or that repulsive thing, Three's Company? Don't be silly. Do you think that Webster can compete with Burt Reynolds naked in a nighttime movie?
Yes, I think
if you're going to see
could,
Webster, the only... I mean, really, get yourself in focus and perspective.
And
furthermore, Webster wants to play golf in the afternoon once he gets settled in.
Oh.
Don't forget, I'm not 21 years of age anymore. I'm getting on to 36.
Oh. Okay, sir.
Now, do you understand? Will you pass the word around Cache Creek?
Yes, I will.
We're going to develop a special little portable TV set for cowboys.
Okay.
Right? So they can watch it.
Okay.
While they're rounding up their doggies.
I thought you were only 35. Anyway, one question that you brought up, or point you brought up, and I think maybe a lot of viewers still may have missed it. I really feel that any prostitute or any illicit or lady of the night can virtually write down anybody's name in her diary.
Made that point.
And I think a lot of people have missed that. The trouble is that once the diary is released, the character assassination is done, and then how do you retract it, and how could, supposing that Ferris had nothing to do with this madam and her diary, how would he ever go about explaining it now?
In the first place, there is an admission to a certain extent in the actions taken by the judge. But I would refer you, in other words, his resignation, but I'd refer you to the incredible case where Sam Bolf was totally and unfairly smeared by a man in court. An appalling business. And I don't know how you avoid that. Any one of us could be smeared at any time by anybody. But if you're clean, you can stand up and you can take the civil action necessary and you can hound them into the ground if you've got enough money to clear your name. But I agree, the moment that book is published, everybody's ruined. And it's a price you pay for freedom in a democracy. We cannot give the judges the right to censor, and I'm talking about the judge on the bench in the proper case.
Yeah, it's a hell of a price to have to pay, and you said it all. If you've got enough money to defend yourself...
You can fight and clear yourself.
Yeah, then that's fine, but if you haven't got enough money, you're
The Lord help you.
Up the tube. Thanks, Jack.
Thank you.
Excellent program.
Thank you very much indeed. This one over here, and this one over here, and 1 minute to go. Yes, yes.
Mr. Webster?
I've got to watch all these signs, and I'm not quite onto it yet. Although I'm quite quick-witted. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just wondering about that man that was stating something about the nurses' aides and the practical nurses at VGH.
Mm-hmm.
I was in the hospital for 6 months with a broken neck, and I thought they were the greatest. They were better than the registered nurses.
Now is not the time to hold an inquest. The nurses are good. The doctors are great. Everybody's wonderful, except for the faults we talked about this morning.
But
What's going to happen, though,
practical
is...
nurses and the nurses' aides were a lot better than the registered nurses.
Never mind that. What's going to happen now is we're going to have a brand new broom. And you know what I'm going to do this morning? I'm going to put Pierre Burton back on the shelf again, because I'm enjoying this.
Mr. Webster.
Yes, ma'am.
You told someone a minute ago to have a heart attack. Well,
I did not. I did not.
Well, jokingly.
Oh.
This is what I'm going to tell you about. I had one, and I was in intensive care for 11 days.
Were you well treated?
In those 11 days, I had one sponge bath. One. My arm had 2 needles in it, was taped to a board.
Maybe you couldn't have a sponge bath because of that.
Well, sure I could. I had one, and they put a ball between your feet so you can't cross your ankles.
Ma'am, I don't want to get into details of nursing complaints at the moment.
Run down Vancouver General when,
I'm not running down Vancouver General.
Well,
I praised McClellan, I praised Bazowski, and I think the appointment of a vice president of nursing will be a big improvement. And I think, too, the fact that the government now apparently realizes that the general must have more money is all in the favor of cleaning up the problems which undoubtedly have existed there. Go ahead, please.
Yes, question that came up the other day about the lotteries.
Yeah.
They're drawing these numbers. A great many times the numbers have never been sold. They've never even been printed. They just run them off on the...
If you're talking about Lotto Canada, yes. Well, they go back into a pool, they tell us, and they come out as bonus prizes later on. I don't like the lottery system at all. The Royal Bank is consistently a big winner on the tickets purchased but not sold. It's not right.
No, I don't think so.
But they tell us that they put that money back into a kitty. I remember one occasion, I think the Royal Bank graciously donated $250,000 to amateur sports. after winning with one of their unpurchased but unsold tickets. It's crazy. I think all these lotteries are stinko. And I can't use a strong enough word to indicate that they are stinko.
Should go back like it was with the Western, where the names went into the pot.
I hate getting a lottery ticket where I can't put my phone number down and get them to phone me if I win.
True.
I think they're all stinko. No time for lotteries. I hardly ever buy the tickets anymore, just when a fit of cupidity overcomes me. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Jack.
Morning.
I've been sitting listening to all this talk about judges and prostitutes and liquor advertising and stuff, and I'd like to know when you're going to get on the case a little bit more of the handicapped people in this city and this province who need more than what they've got and better transportation, as was said the other day by some lady.
I will at the first possible opportunity when I can get at it. And I would remind you that we did one excellent program on one handicapped person, right, which would be a big encouragement. Yeah, I know, but to get these kind of programs, you must have a focus for them. To sit down and have an argument with Van der Zam about allowances, or the Association for Disabled, or all the rest of it, does not produce what you might call entrancing television which anybody will watch. And as soon as there is a proper peg that I can do something about, or somebody presents a proper case to me on it, because I don't know everything. I know most things, but not everything. I'll do it, I promise you. So there. Go ahead, please.
Oh, Mr. Webster.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to know why they don't have policing down at the shopping swaps. I've noticed M1's being sold down there several times.
RCMP Burnaby?
Yeah, in Burnaby and Vancouver also.
All right, RCMP Burnaby, gun control officers in Vancouver, please attend to the swap shops and nail these people who are flogging guns at swap meets.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. How to make friends and influence people at swap and shop owners. Go ahead, please.
Yes, morning, Jack.
Morning.
Yes, about the Vancouver General and some of the changes they've made. The other sordid business they had there before about the pro-abortion, anti-abortion forces making a real public spectacle of everything there.
That was disgusting.
Yes. What they've done now is I believe the governors are going to be appointed.
There will be 5 government representatives in all, one of them identified with the Labour community. I'm very pleased to see that the finest social worker in British Columbia, and I say that without fear of contradiction, has accepted an appointment to the board. And that is my friend Meg Gutteridge from St. James Social Service. There's going to be a professional advisory committee. There's going to be obviously a new corporate setup altogether which will prevent the takeover of the General Hospital by any selfish lobbying group.
Right, yes, but what I was going to say, who does make these appointments, and is it a cabinet appointment, or?
McClellan makes the appointments.
Pardon?
Bob McClellan makes the appointments.
I see. I'm just saying, and she was a cabinet appointment, though.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, right. What I'm saying is, couldn't this possibly make it like a provincial issue? I mean, it's already a federal headache. Isn't this risking, if the appointee herself is rather strongly one way or the other, that it could be construed as a guideline, and therefore?
No, I don't think so. I think McClellan will pick good people. Marie Taylor, who's the interim president, is a very impressive woman.
Right.
I've no fear about the 5 government appointments. Okay, finish on phones.
Thank you.
After this break. Is there anything worth saying? On the air from the Bendrot hearing is our reporter Brian Coxford. Brian, what's happening this morning?
Well, right now the inquiry counsel, Cecil Branson, is just summing up the case, and what he says is they really have two alternatives, and that is, first of all, they deal with the conduct and remove him from the bench, or alternatively, they continue on in the situation that they are now, in other words, do nothing. Now, what they're saying is, or what Cecil Branson is saying is, the public confidence here is paramount in this situation, and he points a number of factors. He says, first of all, there's 4 situations that we must deal with. One, an admitted fact that on October 18th there was an incident involving a prostitute outside a downtown hotel, and it involved the judge. 2, that the incident occurred in a public place.
Right.
That the judge admitted he had been drinking at the time, and 4, that the case has received wide publicity that it has right now, publicity involving a judge. He also points out that take those 4 points and couple them together with the fact that there were 7 police officers right in the immediate area and 3 marked police cars. And he says he questions, you know, what confidence would the police force have in a judge who sits on a provincial bench knowing the conduct that occurred on that day.
Oh, that's a very important point. You're telling me that it was brought out by the council that on the night of the incident there were no fewer than 7 police officers and 3 marked cars in the area, but that the judge, for some reason or another, continued with his unhappy course of conduct.
Right, and the 3 marked cars were immediately outside the hotel where the incident occurred.
It was mention also made unhappily of Mr. Bendrot's alcohol problem.
Yes, the Cecil Branson pointed out, he cited a similar case in Ontario involving a Judge Williams where just a prostitution incident occurred and the judge was removed from the bench, and he pointed out that in this case we have the added problem of drink.
Now, is the Crown, is Mr. Branson making a firm recommendation, or is that going to be in the hands, it would seem from the moment, of the Judicial Council?
I would think that he's going to leave it in the hands of the council, but he is he's pointing out certain facts that...
In other words, he's not coming up and demanding, for instance, that Bendrot be removed forthwith.
No, as close as he came to that is the fact that he said the question of public confidence comes to light here, and he suggests that this type of conduct would not be accepted by the public, and they would not condone this kind of thing of a provincial judge.
And Peden has not been a witness in this thing at all, obviously, because of the admissions of fact accepted by the Judicial Council on the judge's behavior.
That's right, Jack, and
okay,
as a matter of fact, he's not even here.
When will the hearings end?
It looks like it's going to sum up shortly. It'll end this morning, I'm sure.
Okay, well, you'll be giving me a full report tomorrow morning on the show sometime anyway, Brian, right?
Right, Jack.
Okay, give me a call when you know, before you leave downtown.
Good.
Much obliged, Brian.
Bye-bye.
Brian Coxford. 100 Mile House. Go ahead, please.
Hello, Mr. Webster.
Yes, ma'am.
I'd just like to say that I'm quite a young viewer. I'm only 17, and I like your show very much. I used to listen to it on the radio every morning going on the bus. And there's only one thing that I would make a suggestion to your show, and that is that you only point out and attack single persons. You don't attack companies or different businesses as a whole. And that's just what I'd like to point out. I think.
Okay, you'd like to see me use a meat cleaver on Macmillan Blodell.
Pardon me?
Macmillan Blodell?
I can't hear you.
Macmillan Blodell?
Yes?
Matter of fact, I wasn't very nice the other day to that big American company.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit better that you do attack some of the bigger companies.
Well, you know, depends what your bag is. But I'll do my best to keep you happy in 100 Mile House.
Thanks
for calling.
Goodbye.
Bye. 17.
I have a play call for anyone.
Yes, I'll accept it. Where are you speaking from?
Lumbee.
Lumbee. Oh, is that the Enderby call?
Go ahead, sir.
I lost Enderby. Here comes Lumbee. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, hello.
Oh.
Yeah, Jack.
You nearly blew me out the chair. What? You haven't been into the sauce this morning, have you? What do you want to talk about?
Yeah, about prostitution.
Yeah? You don't have any in Lumbee.
No, but I was just kind of...
I should certainly hope not.
A few days ago, and don't you think it would clear it up a lot if they had it?
No, I do not. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Miss Webster.
Morning.
Boral Laskin is probably our finest example of judicial official, and I wonder what he would have to say about this decision to stop the inquiry.
He is not conducting any further inquiry, as I recall, after the resignation of the Chief Judge of the Court of Appeal.
That's a shame, isn't it?
I think it becomes a political matter, actually. I think that, for instance, you couldn't point to any other judge in British Columbia and say it was his responsibility to do anything. It must be political. It must be Otto Lang. I shall contact Mr. Lang today, if possible, and see what he has to tell me. How's that?
Yeah, I'll write him, too.
Yeah, write him a letter and ask him. Now, you asked the other question about the willing buyer and willing seller.
Yeah.
That is legal.
Okay.
Prostitution per se is not illegal. It only becomes illegal when somebody is pimping, procuring the services of another person for the purposes of prostitution.
Okay.
If a girl goes to a different place every time, or goes to the client's place every time, she cannot be charged with keeping a body house. If she goes to her own place every time, that becomes a body house. Similarly, a hotel clerk who knowingly rents rooms for the purposes of short-time tricks, prostitution, that becomes a body house. Otherwise, there are no offenses, living off the avails, of course, or conspiracy to live off the avails by a pimp and a group of girls is an offense. Prostitution itself is not illegal.
How to confuse an issue, eh?
Well, that Supreme Court of Canada decision on the Deborah Hutt case is, in my humble and respectful opinion, quite incomprehensible.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Were you making signs at me? Not yet. Linda? Linda? Go ahead, please.
Yeah, good morning, Jack. I'm sure you're aware of the proposed location of the multiplex by the Surrey mayor last night.
Yeah.
Fry's Corner. I'd just like to express my opinion. I think it's a pretty bad location myself. I don't know about you, but I think it's about one of the last agricultural areas in the lower mainland we have left, and I'd like to see it remain that way. Any ideas how you feel that way?
Oh, I think it's crazy. Fry's Corner.
Yeah, right on.
The man's daft.
The only problem there, they got 176th Street. You can have an awful lot of people come out from the States if it's that accessible.
Burnaby Lake's not a bad idea.
Multiplex for Canada, they must have it in a more central location.
Burnaby Lake's not a bad idea. Go ahead, please.
Hello, Jack.
Yes, ma'am.
I read a very disturbing thing in the Vancouver Express on November the 6th about this 13-year-old boy placed in a foster home with a 25-year-old man who was a homosexual. And the Children's Aid kept bringing this child back to this
I don't think that was in British Columbia.
Yes, it was in Vancouver on West 12th Avenue.
I'll have a look at that, ma'am. Linda, get me out that clipping from the Express and we'll have a look at it sometime in the near future. Go ahead, please.
Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
Good morning.
Morning.
My topic is a little different than the others this morning. It's regarding, I was confronted some time ago with two criminals. I was alone and I was very close to be attacked to one of them in my laundry in a high-rise in West End. Then I remember seeing that these same people, I had seen them
But cut a long story short, ma'am, what is it?
I had seen a composite drawing of them in the paper. I went to the police. The police could not identify these or help me in any way whatsoever because I didn't know what these people had done, what the crime was. I went to the Sun. The Sun...
No, ma'am, too complicated, too long, doesn't make much sense, I must say. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I'd like to make 2 points, Jack. One, I happened to be in VGA or in Richmond General Hospital earlier this year, and before or on the day of admission, they show a film which depicts what the different uniforms mean and point out that only the nurses and the practical nurses wear white uniforms. The rest are other staff, and they're all in different colored uniforms.
You're lying there with a pin in your tummy and they show you a picture?
Pardon?
You're lying there with a pin in your tummy and they show you a picture?
On the day of admission, they take all the new admissions down to a television room and show you a slide film and explain what the anesthetic is going to be like and so on. And it is really a very, very
Not bad at all.
thing. Now, the other thing that I would like to point out, I am amazed that we are able to keep some of the very, very good professionals who are teaching or on the teaching staff at VGH because of the conditions they have to work under. If it were a doctor in private practice, any GP has at least a pleasant office to work in. The specialists and the teaching specialists at VGH are working under conditions of, plaster peeling off the walls, the ceilings falling in on them, and so on. These are extremely dedicated people, and I'm sure no one is criticizing the quality of the staff at VGH, but the conditions there are absolutely unreal.
Well, that's the reason that this inquiry was so essential, because as we know, nobody is proud of the standards of teaching, or rather nobody is proud of the fact that VGH is not regarded as a good teaching hospital in the country.
No,
and let's
I'm not surprised why when they
Here.
They have to work under.
Enough.
The other thing.
Enough. No time for any more. We went a bit long on the telephone calls this morning, but it was a good experiment for the first time, and it meant that I was able to dust Pierre Burton off, put him on the shelf, and use him another morning when we'd start off with lighter-hearted subjects. But it certainly makes life easier.
That's better. Are we doing? Okay. Hello.
You're good. Now, the Book of Insults. I'm not quite sure about that at all. I'm going to do it anyway. My basic message this morning, deadly serious, is that our political leaders must take steps to reassure us that there is no whitewash and that we will know what we must know to restore total faith in the credibility of all judges everywhere. Linda.
Good morning.
Tomorrow.
We have a lady by the name of Nancy McPhee who's written the Book of Insults, so we'll have lots of fun with that tomorrow.
That's useful, a Book of Insults. Tomorrow morning, and other things at 9 a.m. precisely.